To the Batcave. We haven't one moment to lose.
The strongest memories of the 60s Batman was that it permeated our culture. It was everywhere you turned, it was everywhere you looked. You could not walk into a store anywhere without seeing Bat this or Bat that.
Holy sardine!
Batman was a sensation. It was the Star Wars of its day. It was the Harry Potter of its day. We couldn't get enough.
It caught something that could never be duplicated again. There was still an innocence in this country back in the 60s that you do not have now.
Support your police. That's our message.
Well said, Robin.
There was something that, in a very basic way, appealed about Batman to people, even more than Superman.
What was really important was the fun of two guys dressed in these outfits fighting extreme bad guys and making a statement. This is an extension of the 60s pop culture.
I was 4 years old, so I thought it was the greatest achievement in pop culture ever. I'm 45, my opinion hasn't changed very much. I just thought it was a great translation of all the energy and joy that superhero comics is brought to the screen, and they hit it out of the park.
When you actually look at the Batman history, it's so many different things. It's time travel stories, it's detective stories, it's superheroes, it's supervillains, it's film noir, it's goofy science fiction stuff. The genius of it and why it lasted is that it could sort of absorb a lot of different kinds of ideas. So in that sense, the TV show is just the culmination of a kind of zany take on comic books and on the character, which is actually consistent with the way the character was in the comics often.
The movie was originally supposed to premiere first, and the TV show was intended to spin out of that. What happened was ABC TV had a disastrous slate of 1966 programming, and they brought in all these shows that were developed for late 1966, and in a mad rush of panic, put them on in January, and that's when Batman hit. And boy, that just took off.
The night the Batman TV series premiered on ABC, I was in 7th grade. I had been a comic book fan since I was 3 years old. I heard Batman was coming on TV. I couldn't wait. I couldn't believe, really for me, it was the first time since the George Reeves Superman show that a major comic book character was going to be done and done on a prominent level. There was an unprecedented amount of money being spent per episode on this show, and of course, something very special back then, it was going to be broadcast in color.
The Batman TV series of 1966 was the greatest thing in the world. I was 11 years old when it went on. I was the perfect demographic for it. And I had loved comic books. I knew of Batman from the comic books. And this show was just eye-popping. I watched it from the very first episode. It debuted in the middle of the winter. And the next day, it was all the kids could talk about at school. All they could talk about for the next 10, 12, 15 weeks, whatever, was who the next villain was, what was going to happen to Batman on the next night. The show was, of course, serialized. It was on Wednesday night, and then it had a cliffhanger, and then it was on Thursday night. It was fantastic. I believed he was really out there, and he really drove this Batmobile, and somewhere out there, Batman existed, and we were watching the telecasts of this.
Batman was really a phenomenon, and it really hit like lightning. No one around the schoolyard could really talk about anything else. It would be like, did you see Batman? Man, it's really a cool show. Yeah, and are you going to watch next week? I remember suddenly every birthday party I went to, there was more and more Batman stuff. There were Batman masks, Batman costumes, Batman figures, and occasionally I'd bug my mother and say, hey, can I get a Batman figure? Can I send in for a Batman ring? Something like that.
Adam couldn't go out without being mobbed. People wanted his autograph on the street. Everybody recognized him. He gave autographs. He was very polite to everybody, especially old ladies. He was wonderful.
The show completely sparked my interest in comics. I really had no concept of what they were, but my dad came home and said, well, you like the TV show, you'll like this, handed me a comic book, and it's just, you may as well have handed me crack. Since that day, there hasn't been a single day that's gone by that I haven't read a comic or written a comic or picked up a comic and flipped through it or something like that.
I wasn't born until 1970, so I didn't see the series until its second life in syndication. And of course, as any kid who saw it at a young age, you take it entirely seriously. It's as real as anything could be. And for the decades that followed, it was the coolest thing that ever happened in terms of the larger community of people absorbing the very cool characters that inhabited comics.
I first saw it with my brother in some friend's basement when we were kids. It was the first time I think I ever saw anybody wearing spandex. It was probably early 80s when we watched the reruns, and all my friends got into it. We'd all go to, his name was Doug Wolf, we'd all go to his house after school and watch Batman in his basement, and his mom would make us like peanut butter and jelly.
We'll never have any idea whether if the movie had come first and then the TV show, if we'd had the same phenomenon that we ended up having, but whatever they did, it really worked. So by the time you had that show on the air for 4 or 5 months in every home in America, it was a weekly commercial for this big budget movie that was coming out in the summer.
Once the ratings went through the roof, they knew they had to do something, and they were going to put it through the movie. So they rushed the movie through without a rewrite.
So Fox decided they want to make a Batman movie. The only requirement was let's use all the 4 villains, the 4 basic major villains, and that was it. And I wrote the movie.
The show finished filming, I believe, in February of '66. They went into hiatus for a couple of weeks, and they started filming, I think, end of March to all of April to maybe beginning of May. And they went immediately into production because the movie came out August the 3rd of 1966.
My agent called and said I can audition for the Catwoman role in the new Batman movie. I said, oh, okay. I think it was the second day of auditions. I walked in and I sat down in the chair and curled up and started licking my hand while I'm turning the pages and kneading and doing all these purring noises. I guess it worked, because not 2 days later I was in costume fittings, and 1 day later on the set filming. And filming one of the most difficult scenes, which was the bombarding from up above of Penguin's submarine. And with sparks flying every which way, the set falling apart. It was on gimbals, and so it was rocking all the time. I was literally thrown into it, barely knew the lines.
Lee Merriweather came into the film at the last minute. Julie Newmar wasn't available to do it, and they held their production long enough as they could, shooting around the Catwoman character in order to find a recasting for the part. Cesar took her under his wing and he got her into the shot because she couldn't see with the mask on.
Cesar Romero was wonderful. Well, they all were to the new kid on the block. They knew I hadn't done the role before. And if you watch that particular scene, you can see Cesar hold on to me, and he protected me one time from sparks flying from one of the things that fall down. He was wonderful in that respect.
I say it's crazy.
I worked very hard to be that character. Of course, it was a farce, but you have to be very believable when you're playing farce. You cannot do it halfway. You have to throw yourself into it, and they all did. Burgess was one. There's a scene in the Periscope area when he says, "Run silent, run deep."
Run silent, run deep.
And he had the long cigarette holder in the cigarette, and he worked, got it just right, and run silent, run deep, and then it just goes like that.
I love the movie. It has some wonderful things in it that I always liked. Commodore Schmidlap in the Batcave, Adam trying to get rid of the bomb.
Quick! Everyone, flee for your lives! Into the street!
Everybody talks about that scene. How do you get rid of a bomb? Originally in the script, he kept going by. Everywhere he went, the band was there. Impossible. Go buys him. What does he turn around? And I said, well, I'll tell you what I'll need. He'll run by him. He goes to one side, he goes to throw it. There is the rowboat going by there with a fella embracing his girlfriend, and he goes across, a mother duckling comes up, and you build the whole sequence. You know, and that's what a director does.
In 1966, we didn't have DVD, we didn't have the internet. We only had 3 channels. And Batman was on one of those channels twice a week. That's unusual right there. It was the highest rated show. We couldn't get enough. So a Batman movie coming out, we couldn't wait.
The first time I can remember knowing about the movie was the full-page ads that were taken out in all the comic books. It was an experiment. I mean, how many TV series were turned into movies simultaneously when they were running on TV? What they were trumpeting was the fact that oh, this is more lavish and there's more money here, and you're going to see spectacular things we couldn't possibly bring to you on a small screen or with a reduced budget. So it was a good marketing idea for them to band together the most predominant villains of the time into one picture. That just made sense.
The four of them. Their forces combined.
Holy nightmare!
You know, TV was still kind of new, even in the 60s. It was only, 20 years old or so. There were some older people who had heard of this Batman phenomenon, but wouldn't dare turn it on their TV set. But here it was in the movies. You can come to the movies and see it.
The wonderful thing about the movie is that the TV shows are half-hour episodes, and here we actually had a movie which was like an hour and a half, so it's like 3 episodes almost together. And so you have to remember it's like a drug. We couldn't get enough of this Batman, so to have it for an hour and a half was even better.
Batman should have been here hours ago.
Perhaps you didn't leave a clear enough clue in your apartment.
Of course I did. I can't understand why Batman hasn't dashed into our track.
A lot of kids like me were watching Batman in a movie theater in color for the first time. I had a black and white TV set. Although color TV was around in the 1960s, it was considered a high-end product. A color TV to an average middle-class family didn't really come around until the late 60s or early 70s.
The Batman series, when it was shown on television here, of course, was only shown in black and white because colour television didn't come to the UK until 1969. And, of course, we just picked up the local film magazines and there was Batman in colour on the cover. We thought, wow, this is what it looks like in colour. So that's why everybody rushed to the cinema. It wasn't just seeing the TV series in a much bigger, more blockbuster version. It was seeing it in colour. And that was very important to us when you had little tiny sort of black and white TVs at home.
When I was 8 years old, this was my favourite film. I find it strange looking back on it that we even liked the Batman TV show when we couldn't see those eye-popping colours, the Riddler's green jumpsuit and all that kind of stuff, which is now so much a part of the appeal of that phenomenon. And yet we liked it straight in black and white, but when we saw it in colour, we liked it more.
I went to see the Batman movie and sat through it twice, because I was able to do that. You could sit and watch a movie again. You stayed in the cinema, bought another ice cream, sat there and enjoyed it. Watched Batman, A Man Called Flintstone, which was its double feature, and then waited till Batman came on again. So we had plenty of opportunity to see this movie, and the kids just went in droves. I think we felt that when we dragged our families along to the movie, we again legitimised the fact that Batman was a very important thing. This is just not on TV, guys. We're going to the cinema to see Batman on the big screen. He's arrived. I can see why there were so many movie spin-offs from American TV shows at that time.
There was a little mini boom in Britain for films that were equivalent to TV series. The Doctor Who movies were remakes of the TV show that was still running. But also in Britain at the time, there various feature versions of two-part Man from U.N.C.L.E. episodes were doing very well theatrically.
There was certainly no hesitation in promoting the Batman film in the UK, and very quickly after its American release, I think they realised that the worldwide interest in Batman was such that a movie was the next step. The movies were very important, remember, to UK audiences, well, perhaps to world audiences, but to UK in the 1960s, it was considered a very important entertainment. So to actually see Batman on the big screen was something very special.
Batman!
It's all right, Robin.
Holy heart failure!
First saw the original Batman movie, probably some Saturday matinee, Channel 50 in Detroit, and I can recall my brother and I wondering why it was such a long episode, because it just kept going and going. As a kid, you just don't see the campiness as much. You just see it as real, and you take it seriously, and you think it's fun and exciting.
I saw it the day it came out, because at that point I was pretty much a Bat fanatic, and so was my younger brother. And I think for a week prior it had been Batman, Batman, Batman. When are we going to see the Batman movie? Take us now, Dad. Are you done eating, Dad? Can we go to the Batman movie now, Dad? Can you eat at the movie theater? Can we eat afterwards? We just have to see Batman. We're going to miss Batman.
That huge level of Batmania, that thing that swept the nation in '66, it was unlike anything anybody had seen since, the 1930s when Superman hit, and he was suddenly everywhere. And it wasn't, again, until the Beatles and Batman and then The Simpsons. There's only 4 or 5 things like that in all of American pop culture that were such gigantic phenomena in such a short period of time. And for that brief shining period of about 6 or 8 months or so, when it was really strong, it was just Batman was everywhere. And I, at 4 years old, I couldn't have been happier.
This movie came just over the height of the Batman TV show popularity. I think it was just on the downswing at that particular moment in time. So it pumped new life into it. And it was really a focal point for kids. And it was the kids who wanted to see the Batcopter, and the kids who wanted to see the Batboat or Batcycle. And that's really who it was aimed for, and I believe that's who embraced the movie when it came out.
Batboat rocked. The Batboat was really cool because, you know, it had the fins on it, go really fast and everything.
The Batboat, that glass-drawn Batboat that was sleek and came in handy whenever there was crime on the water. The Batcopter, which I also have models of all over the house because it's just, who finds crime in a copter? But, you know, it looked great. All the stuff, you know, was created for the movie because, I mean, they wanted it in the TV show, but there was no budget for it in the TV show, so they were able to do these things in the movie and then turn that over and use those things for the TV show.
Well, the Batcopter and the Batboat were cool, but they weren't as cool as the Batmobile.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger, ready to move out.
That was another element of this show and this movie that us kids loved. I mean, it's Batman, it's the actors, it's the costumes, the villains, but that car, to this day, I mean, I don't know how a younger person feels, but anyone growing up in that era, that is the coolest car in the universe. There's just something really neat about that little cockpit and those exhaust pipes coming out of the back and the fins and the rocket engine and the bat insignias. You know that if you saw the Batmobile driving, speeding along, you wouldn't want to stop it. Cops aren't going to touch it. You just knew that this is badass.
Love the Batmobile. So wanted a Batmobile. I would tell my dad, you know, like, if we have to buy a new car, why are we buying a Volkswagen? Can we buy a Batmobile? There must be one somewhere. Can we buy something that looks like a Batmobile? Can we at least get a car that's painted black that looks cool like that? But, you know, there was no Batmobile at the Dini house, I'm sorry to say.
The car was amazing for its day. I remember going to the World's Fair in 1964 and 1965 in New York, and at the Chrysler Pavilion, they had an advanced concept car, a turbo car. Well, to me, when I saw the Batmobile, it echoed back to that concept turbo car I had seen at the World's Fair.
The Batmobile is still hands down the coolest car. I'd say it's cooler than the Millennium Falcon, any vehicle you want to pull from any sci-fi show or other car. Nothing is cooler than taking the Lincoln Futura from the late 50s and dressing it up the way George Barris did.
The Batmobile is, to this day, the coolest car I've ever seen, and if it were street legal, I would be driving a Batmobile. If you go in my house, there is probably not a line of sight in my house somewhere where you cannot see a Batmobile.
Theme song I thought was cool. I thought it was really, really cool. And the fact that there were no words to the theme song other than just Batman. It became a hit record. And to this day, I still will walk around New York City and hear people on their ringtones on their phones getting da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So, I mean, it has really, again, permeated our culture.
I think what people forget is they used to know how to make really great theme music. Just that opening theme music for Batman just pulled you right in.
It breaks my heart, to some degree, that Neil Hefti, who is one of the great jazz composers of all time, is known best for this. While it is an amazing theme, he's an extremely versatile human being and an extremely successful recording artist. It's an unforgettable piece of music, and there's nobody on earth at this point that it's not encoded in their DNA. You hear those few notes and you just pop right up.
Great thing about the Batman movie was its influence, as I said, on the things that we liked. I mean, the way it was directed, strange camera angles, shooting up at the actors, shooting sideways. And then, of course, came the fight scenes. I always thought the kapows, the splats and the bams were all there really sometimes to hide the fact that maybe the fight scenes weren't perhaps as good as they should have been, but they were very realistic to me as a 12-year-old kid, and I thought they were fantastic. That kapow and that splat almost like leapt out of the screen at you. It wasn't confined by that little sort of 21-inch square that you had in the corner of the living room.
They were trying to capture the feeling of panels of a comic book and the different angular ways artists approached drawing superhero comic books just by the tilt of a camera. They were trying to get the 4-color comic book experience loudly across to America and the world. And if you look again at the time of what was happening in the field of art, specifically pop art, again, you're talking about primary colors. So that was really the natural progression to make it feel like a comic book come to life.
I think during the 50s you could see the culture, the pop culture was starting to reference itself. And you had modern artists that were starting to do art based on the comic strip characters. Then you got in the early 60s, you had a bunch of things coming together.
You had artists like Lichtenstein who were taking images from the comics, just a single panel blow up of a fist coming directly into camera and going pow or something. That was a feeling that was transposed, you know, very clearly into the Batman world. They took as much of that from art as they could and tried to transpose that.
Andy Warhol, Mel Ramos, and Lichtenstein, the great modern artists, they were all doing kind of comic book theme art. The culture is starting to crack open like an egg, really.
When we did the pow and the zap and all those things, I was totally conscious of the things in the art world, in the world of popular culture that were happening. And certainly Batman in his bright colors and everything was definitely a reflection of the thing of the times. That wasn't just me, I might say that goes to the costume design, the direction, the production, that goes to Dozier, everybody who was connected with it.
Comic books were being looked at not just as this throwaway anymore. It was suddenly being looked at with some time and distance, and as adults, they were looking at it as art, as an art form. Jules Feiffer put out his book in 1965, The Great Comic Book Heroes, which talked about his own personal childhood memories of reading comic books in the 40s and what it meant to him. And he was talking for his generation, which were of age at that time. So Batman fit in with what was going on in that mid-60s period.
We were very much at the edge of a cultural revolution, a youth revolution, a sexual revolution, none of which is apparent anywhere in Batman whatsoever. The message is very clearly, support your law and order, support your police. And all the values of the show are based in traditional 1910, 1920, family values. So the fact that it was hip at all, I think, comes more from the look of it than from the underlying message. And maybe that was part of the popularity. Maybe they managed to so beautifully wed the attitude of a very conservative post-war America with a splash and a look and the visuals that were very hip and very now at the time.
When you talk about escapist entertainment, let's set the stage. Where was America at that time? It was a time where a lot was going wrong. You had protests, demonstrations on college campuses were well underway. You had civil rights movement that was moving toward rioting in the streets of many cities. There was the beginnings of the women's movement. There was a lot at that moment worth escaping from. And I think that the timing was just right to bring in a hero on purely fantasy terms that would get us away from what was going on. So pure escapist fare like Batman, the timing just couldn't have been better.
I think when you look at the whole Batman history, if you go back to the earlier Columbia series of the 1940s, then you look at the TV series with Adam West in the 1960s, then you come up to the more later Batman movies. I think the interesting thing about each one has been a progression. Each one has explored the character and changed it in some way. In the kind of pop-arty sort of feel of the 1960s, Batman was absolutely right. It reflected the comics reflected the series, and it was perfect.
I think I really have a new appreciation for the TV show and the movie because they came out at a time when it really saved the Batman comics. It really gave a shot in the arm to the whole industry along with what Marvel was doing.
The TV show and movie both helped and hurt the Batman comics. It helped in regard to sales. Sales went through the roof. Batman comics were selling over 1 million copies an issue.
You look at the sales figures on the first issue after the TV show hit, and circulation went from about 350,000 a month to 1 million copies a month overnight with a complete sell-through. Batman comics were selling out everywhere.
In fact, DC found anything that it put out where it featured Batman predominantly on the cover was selling. It was only in the aftermath of Batman, the TV show, and Batman, the movie. When that all disappeared, the comic book sales plummeted. And in fact, one of the things that really helped Batman re-find his audience and re-appeal to his audience was a new reinvention of the character by Denny O'Neil, writer, and Neil Adams, artist, which brought Batman back to his darker roots. More and more, bit by bit, everything began to change until Frank Miller came in 1986 and deconstructed Batman and reinvented Batman in the famous graphic novel The Dark Knight Returns.
It's interesting to see the difference between the Batman of the 1960s and the Batman of the 80s and the 90s. Batman became a darker figure, the Caped Crusader, he became a Dark Knight, became almost more like a villain as well in the way he dressed and the way he looked. I think there was actually a backlash against the kind of fun feel that Batman had in the 60s, and there was a desperate attempt to get away from that, to avoid that sort of surreal, campy kind of feel.
When I was 4, I thought it was high drama. It was only after I got to be a teenager and I went through that same rebellious streak that all teenage comic book fans go through of, well, this isn't Batman. Batman is serious. Batman is all about being a grim avenger of the night. They're making fun of us, and I got over it. And I got back to reality and realized, look, Batman's such a great character, and he's such an elastic character that you can take him to any extreme. You can make him the Christian Bale Dark Knight. You can do the Michael Keaton thing with him. You can make him a comedy star in a show, and it's still a great character no matter what.
Batman has been portrayed many, many different ways. And really, depending on when you grew up and what you were reading or seeing or hearing, that defines what to you is the one true Batman.
You know what this means, don't you?
The legacy of the 60s Batman is that this will always be the way some people see comic books, not just the Legend of Batman, but superheroes, comic books, across the world. It will not be forgotten.
The great thing about the 60s movie was that I think it is the personification of what the series really was. It captured everything about the show we liked. And I think it brought Batman to a wider audience, but also I think made it more long-lasting. It gave it more everlasting appeal. And so that other generations are able to appreciate Batman and see just about its origins.
As the poet says, on land you may command, at sea it is me.
I had no idea how important it was or what the span of the fan base was. Because of all ages. And they were all super enthusiastic. I was thrilled just to be a part of it.
How did it go, Catwoman?
Perfectly.
It has something intrinsically entertaining, especially for kids, that not every kid can accept or really should be exposed to the harder-edged Dark Knight version of Batman, at least at first. It was a way of showing a hero that is cool-looking as opposed to threatening and dark, who has a good pal as a sidekick, who can get into fun adventures with colorful villains where the action is thrilling rather than grotesque. And I think that it has a tremendous amount of appeal for that.
The reason they remember it so fondly is they're really remembering their youth. It takes them back to a time when the world was happier, and they associate it with things they saw at that time. And I think Batman stands for a happier time in many ways.
In the 60s, at that one particular moment in our culture, when we needed an escape, when we needed a new kind of hero, there was Batman.
Come on!